Welcome back to the Voices of Change. I'm your host, Tex Wambui, and today's episode is rooted in a theme that's central to our existence: environmental stewardship, how we care for the land and how the land cares for us. But before we get into it, I'm going to start off by saying a word of the week. This week's word it ties back to actually what we're going to talk about today with our guest. The word is stewardship. It's not ownership. It's my responsibility. It's a relationship, and today's guest lives that word in every sense. So our guest today is Codie Horse-Topetchy, and I don't want to mess up her Indigenous name, so I'll let her have the chance to say that when she comes on. She is the founder of Dauitagya, but I'd also let her say that, which also means good medicine. It's an organization dedicated to empowering Indigenous girls and women through land-based education, cultural knowledge, and intergenerational sisterhood. She is Kiowa, Comanche, Otay, Missouri, and Pawnee. She's a student as well, a language revitalizer, a researcher, and a young climate leader of color, which are on the same cohort together 2025. So Codie, welcome to the Voices of Change. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here as well. So I'll just do my introduction really fast. Don't want to take too much time. So hello, my name is Codie Horse-Topetchy. I'm Kiowa, Comanche, Otomazura, and Pawnee. My Kiowa name is Eagle Woman. I'm currently a student at the University of Oklahoma, so I reside in Norman, Oklahoma, but I'm originally from southwestern Oklahoma on our Kiowa Comanche Apache Reservation. And I'm also the founder of Dauitagya, which in our language, our Kiowa language, it means good medicine. And I have some other organizations I'm a part of as well, but that's my main one right now. And that's pretty much where all my focus is.
Awesome. Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Sorry if I butchered any of the names in the beginning.
No,
I was
it's
trying
okay.
so hard to make sure I said them correctly. But let's start off by into kind of the first part of our conversation. We're going to talk about roots and land connection. When we talk about stewardship, your work with bison restoration, land-based teachings, and ecological research really stands out. So what does stewardship really mean to you personally?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Those are really things that always been passionate about. And bison's kind of one of my newer passions, but I've always been passionate about culture and land. And honestly, I think all three of those things are interconnected. And so is like the language. All of the sectors that I'm based in, buffalo restoration, language, land-based education, all of those are interconnected as an Indigenous person. And I don't think you can really separate any of them because, to steward the land, that's something that's inherently a part of us as Indigenous people. It's a part of our origin stories, our creation stories. So I feel like that's our inherent duty, not just to us when preserving the land for, our future generations, but also to the land itself and seeing the land as kin, seeing the inhabitants of the land as kin. So, like obviously the land and our plant relatives, but also, those four-legged relatives like the buffalo, you know, and like other animals, that inhabit the land and, just kind of stewarding them as well. And that just means being respectful and mindful of them too.
Wow. I really resonate with that as well because one of the things that we also do with Voices of Change, we do wetlands restoration, specifically Mangua wetlands in Kenya. We're pushing right now to get it become a Ramsar site to become what's legally protected, as well as push for growth and understanding of how we can continue to conserve that area because Mangua wetlands is very important to the Lemuru community. It's something that I personally am. I grew up seeing that area, but now it's very dry. People not taking care of it. So we want to get that back revitalized, and we want the youth to be at the forefront of this. So I could definitely resonate with that when it comes to your Indigenous background. Now, in terms of how did your upbringing in a traditional Kiowa, right? Is that how I see it?
Kiowa.
Kiowa. How did your upbringing in a traditional Kiowa household influence kind of your understanding of land and leadership?
Honestly, like that's everything about who I am is, being a Kiowa woman. And honestly, a lot of that came from, like you said, my upbringing. I was blessed to grow up in a household with both my mother and my grandparents. And I always tell people I think that was one of the biggest blessings of my lifetime was being able to grow up alongside both my grandpa and my grandma. And of course, my mother. So they were both very knowledgeable and traditional people. My grandmother taught me a lot about what it means to be a Kiowa woman, what it means to be, a good woman, rooted in culture and how to carry myself in a good way. And then my grandpa, he was actually one of our traditional leaders of one of our ancient societies that we still have to this day, which is our Kiowa clan in our language of Dauitagya. He was one of our four headsmen of that while he was still here. He passed in 2012. But I think honestly, seeing the way that my relatives carried themselves and how much they cared about our culture and our language, and I seen the kind of man my grandfather was. He was a leader. He was a humble leader. He cared about his people, and he cared about, not just the people that are alive today, but he was mindful of those that are going to come further down the line. And that comes, with preserving our culture and preserving our languages. That's something that he ingrained into me as a little girl. He would talk language to me, and we'd go to language class together. He told me all about Kiowa stories, and so did my grandmother as well. And honestly, I feel like that is a big part of why I care so much about, these things, the buffalo and the land, the language, the culture. It's because of them. And then sometimes when I get up, I present at all these like conferences and stuff. Sometimes, I'll even say like, it's them speaking through me, and it's honestly everything that I know, a lot of it is inspired by them. And I have a picture of them right over there. And I just, always think about them all the time. So yeah, I just want to, give a shout out to my grandparents and also my mother, because I wouldn't be the lady that I am today. I couldn't be able to do any of the work that I'm doing.
That's really wonderful, and very inspiring. It also kind of leads up to kind of what you currently do right now through your organization. Can you say the name of it the correct way? I don't want to mess it up.
Dauitagya.
Dauitagya. Okay.
Yeah, that was good. That was really good.
Dauitagya. Okay. With that, you're creating a space for girls and women to reconnect with the land. How does that process kind of work? How does that process how do you see it transforming them in terms of, you're now a leader and shaping for the next generation? How does that process work for you?
I think this is honestly something that had been like a long time coming, this idea for this program. Because for the longest time, I was wondering, what can I do as a young person, as a young woman? Um, in the position, I'm only 22 years old. Like, what can I do, to help my community? And I started thinking about what my passions are, like, again, our culture and language. And then I started thinking about who in my community I think needs, some help. And obviously, all community members need help. But I think, our young ladies and our young women, our girls, our little sisters, I think that there's a special kind of care that they need when it comes to, ensuring that they know that they're valuable and that they're kind of uplifted mentally and spiritually and emotionally. And I think culture is the way to do that. And I also think returning to the land is also a way to do that. Just because I think that obviously to me, culture is healing. And I also think that being outside in nature and returning ourselves to the land, that's also healing. So with that, I have planned like a whole curriculum that are rooted in Kiowa culture that is going to like allow our girls to, learn some of our cultural practices that have been, targeted and put away, or that are, on the road to becoming, kind of endangered in a sense. And also, returning out to land. And because we have our land base in southwestern Oklahoma near the Wichita Mountains, and just kind of returning, to being able to like just go out in nature and identify, some of our native medicines and our plants, and even growing and harvesting those plants ourselves. And even with the buffalo, like returning to being able to harvest the buffalo as well, and returning to, that connection that we had with him. Because at the end of the month, we're actually starting off with a community garden. And in that, I'm going to allow the girls to, take part in planting this garden. I mean, once it starts growing, that anybody in the community can come take what they want. And some of the first plants that we are planting are traditional medicines, and then also wildflowers that we have stories of in our culture that are very, important to us as Kiowa people. And then I have a whole like ton of other stuff planned, but that's just one of the examples that I have of how, we're trying to return to land through our culture.
That's really awesome. And when I first heard about this, we were at the YCLC conference where we all had the chance to kind of meet each other and hear what everybody's doing in terms of for their community and their projects in relation to kind of environmental stewardship. And it really was very inspiring to hear that you're actually at the forefront of this and taking the lead to be a voice of the people. You're being a voice of change for your people, which is awesome. And it's really amazing just to hear about it. So what do you think the broader environmental movement is missing when it comes to understanding Indigenous relationships to land?
I think honestly, I was able to witness this actually last week, I believe, I went to the North American Bison Summit. And this goes for every environmentalist circle, but what I've noticed from non-natives is that they don't often understand the spiritual connection that we have to the land and also to, like our four-legged kin, like buffalo. I think honestly, it's just something that we grow up knowing because of our values and our stories, and it's just something that we know from when we're young. And even growing up, like even like the things that I have witnessed, the buffalo do. I witnessed the buffalo like have ceremony. I witnessed the buffalo have funerals. I've witnessed the way that they carry themselves and their family units and the way that they protect each other, and just the stuff that I have seen with my own two eyes is something that I don't know. I'm a very spiritual person. I consider myself a very prayerful person. I believe in the things that you cannot see. I go to ceremonies all the time, and I'm a very spiritual person at heart. And the things that I have witnessed, I feel like that's what the environmentalist movement is missing a lot of the time. Is you know, like science and research, that I love that stuff. But then they're also forgetting that there's a whole nother part, to environmentalism in the sense that the land, these beings that are in the land, these animals, they have feelings too, and they're living too. And I think that's a big thing that a lot of people miss. Because I know, like, I read, like, in the Amazon rainforest, there's like a cloud forest that they gave it like personhood because the people that live there, the indigenous people that live there, see it as a living being. And I know that there's another mountain, like in New Zealand, and the Maori people, like, they also see that as living, and they gave that personhood as well. And I think those are honestly like really great steps towards acknowledging, the land and its beings, as living because they are. And I would honestly say that's my big takeaway as far as what's missing, I think.
Yeah, that really hits the nail on the head because it's actually relevant to being a voice of change, right? I keep going back to the aspect of voice of change. I mean, one of the things that we're doing as well is the aspect of what we feel in terms of Mongol wetlands is that there's a lack of people actually advocating and pushing for restoration and preservation and conservation of the Mongol wetlands, considering it's a biodiversity area in Limuru town. And one of the things that eventually that we actually want to do with that is kind of bring the youth perspective to it, right? And also with the rate of technology right now is growing up, so eventually we also want to incorporate how we can utilize technology for the benefit of preserving and restoring that wetland. We got some things planned right now, but as of I would say some of the things that we're actually doing is kind of based upon what I've learned about your organization. It's inspiring to kind of understand, one, how people can be understanding of the importance of the land that they're at, and also the part of the environmental stewardship that they're missing on understanding the importance of having birds, actually, because that area used to have like birds come there, habitate, make babies and stuff, but over time it's declined, meaning that that area is not suitable, and means the environment and people are not taking care of it. So it's really inspiring to kind of see how we have parallel types of works of preserving and pushing for that environmental stewardship and that roots and land connection to, your personal story as well as to how it impacts and influences your community. But now let's kind of transition into kind of, language reclamation and climate justice, right? We're both cohort members of the YCLC 2025 this year. And you're on a path right now to becoming is it Kiowa?
Iowa.
Kiowa. I'm gonna learn some new words today. You're on the path of becoming a Kiowa language teacher. Can you talk about how language and land knowledge are connected?
I think honestly that's something too that I'm really passionate about too, and incorporating the land into my curriculum. So I'm a Kiowa language teacher candidate, which means I'm on the path to becoming certified to teach the Kiowa language. And as you probably know, all indigenous languages in the world are endangered, no matter where you are in the world. So I think honestly, like, language is also another facet that I also want to incorporate because it's something that our people really need, in a dire need of. But I think that language and land, like I said, you can't really take them apart because they're all a part of, culture, and they're related. I think to me, everything like culture, language, land, buffalo, it's all a circle to me, and they're all like connected to one another. I always tell people that, and some people don't understand it, but I think about the old days, when we lived for my people. I'm a Plains person. I'm a Plains native. So my people, we traveled from like Canada to southern Mexico, and back to Oklahoma. We traveled all throughout the northern and southern plains. And, we didn't have classrooms in those days to learn. We learned out in the land. And I think that's something that we have lost, just like, for example, like the word for buffalo, we have like probably like 30 something words maybe, just because like it was so integral to our culture. We have names of like different plants, all the plants, we have names for our seasons. That's how we kept track of, our cycles. On my page, I always post like we're in this moon cycle, and that, a lot of it has to do with our observations of the land around us. And I think that's important in the education that I'm doing because, it's a big part of who we were at one time, and now that society has pushed us into classrooms and in classroom teaching, it's something that we've lost. But I think honestly, like land-based education is something that I'm a big advocate for because I think that is how we're going to bring back our culture, in a sense, just because that's what they took away from us. We were nomadic people. We were people that love to be outside, and I think that's why it's so important to incorporate the language into that, land-based learning as well. Because then there are words that, we can't even talk about in the classroom, like, words for like pen and paper and pencil and, but there's like so much more, in the language than that. Like I said, there's 30 words for buffalo, all the plants that we know, just all of that stuff, we need to save that as well. And I think we can do that by, returning to land-based education. So.
Wow. That's awesome, and just finding that connection and kind of hearing a little bit of the history of the community you come from. It's very relevant as well to kind of what we are doing as well in terms of like Kikuyu people, right? I'm Kikuyu, that's my tribe, and we're trying to get the Mangua wetlands to becoming something that they understand because it's in their community. To understanding like we have to advocate it from the youth point of view, as well as being able to use our language to advocate for legal restoration of that place and for the push of climate justice, right? And we're both part of the Young Climate Leaders of Color, right? So what would you say, how does climate justice look like from kind of where you stand and your stand on your view?
I think honestly, in terms of climate justice, like I think that Indigenous people of the North Americas have been injustice since, colonizers set foot on this land. As soon as they came, they not only genocided us, but they also genocided the land in a sense. They were chopping down trees and they didn't understand the way that Indigenous people took care of the land, like even prescribed burns of the Northeast. And, they didn't understand the way that we lived with the land. I was reading a book for one of my environmental sustainability classes, and it talked a lot about just the difference in the way that Native people view the land versus when the European counterparts came and how it caused so many issues. They have a very extractive mindset, a very capitalistic mindset. And I think that is honestly so different than what Indigenous people view. In my community, the Kaiwa people view, we come from a mindset, of sustainability and like, stewardship, taking care of one another, but also taking care of the land. And honestly, like we have been facing climate injustice since, 1492, since colonization. And honestly, like even now today, like there's like different kinds of mining all throughout my state in Oklahoma. We're known for like oil and natural gas, and that's everywhere you look. There's 39 different tribes here too, just to mention that. So we're all kind of squeezed into one state, and we're squeezed into a state full of, different oil and gas companies, different limestone mining. And on our reservation, there's somebody actually trying to come up with a new mining that's never been done before in North America. And it's right on our res in the Kiowa Comanche Pasture Reservation. Really problematic. Just stuff like that. We're still being injustice to this day. And it's kind of hard, we're the smallest population in not just North America, but the whole world. Native Indigenous people are just trying to like speak up and use our voices. That's what I just wish that more non-natives, would listen, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. Starting off from understanding like the historical context and significance to currently now is something that I think is kind of how climate justice looks like, is people understanding the importance of the history, the situation, and what's transpired over time. So what would you say, how can Indigenous ecological knowledge inform how we respond to like the current climate crisis?
I think that's a really good question, and that's honestly going to vary a lot from where you are based and the different Indigenous communities that are in your area, because, there's hundreds and hundreds of tribes, and we all carry different knowledge systems. We all carry different beliefs. But, people always say, oh, Indigenous people, we're the first stewards of the land, and that's true. I know there's a statistic that always goes around, and I don't quote me on it because I don't remember the percentage, but it's like saying like Indigenous people make up this really, really tiny fraction of the world, but we care for like this much of the world's, land base. And I think honestly that says a lot just about, our values and our beliefs, and caring for the land. And I think honestly, it reminds me a lot, that question reminds me a lot of a project that I'm working on, one of my research projects, and we're looking at flooding on the Otomazura Reservation, which is another one of my tribes. And in that, I'm working on the oral history and traditional ecological knowledge side, and then we have scientists who are working on the hydrology, GIS side, and we're finding ways to combine both of those to, help better understand how we can help predict flooding and, what are some solutions that we can take to protect, the reservation. And in that, I've just been interviewing the elders and, what their knowledge is of, climate change, what they have noticed, what are the knowledge that we carry about water, about these different plants that can help mitigate, climate change. And just that, working with what we have known for thousands of years and combining that with, modern technology, I feel like there's a lot of good things that can come from that. And honestly, it just takes, again, listening to Indigenous people and what we have to say. Because, we've been saying these things for thousands of years. We've been carrying these practices for thousands of years. And it's honestly, it just takes people to just listen to us.
That's so true.
Collaborate with your Indigenous communities, too.
Exactly. That is so true because kind of tying back to kind of what we're at the Voices of Change, the wetlands restoration. I'm based in the U.S., but I was born and raised in Kenya, but I still have that tie to that specific wetland because I grew up watching it. But over time, it's the ecosystem has been disrupted because of things that's happened so far, and now trying to respond to the current crisis that the wetland is going through. It does require to understand first the indigenous reasoning of why this place is important, the history of it, and why it's also important to have people willing to collaborate with us. So that's really, really amazing to just hear about the amount of tribes that are there and the current work that y'all are doing, especially with the water. Because that's really amazing. Using technology is a great way to kind of understand that now. It's really amazing to know that. Another thing is I started doing this thing where I had this internship once where in the beginning of our meetings we would have to acknowledge the land where we're from or the land we were in at that current time. And at first I used to be very confused. I'm like, what do you mean? Like I'm gonna say the name of the city I'm in. They're like, no, the actual native indigenous land that you're in. And I picked up that over time, and it's something that so far it's something I really actually do it every single time that I do. And it's been mind opening and it's changed my perspective and how I look at certain history and certain things that I've been taught. And what would you say though, in terms of what would you want non-native allies to understand about the cultural and environmental work that you do?
I feel like I don't want to repeat myself, but, keep saying the same thing, but I think it's just so important to understand, the spiritual aspect of, buffalo, the spiritual aspect of land. Because, I think it's important that we respect them too as a relative. That's something that was told to me by my grandpa Leroy. He's been working with buffalo for like over 40 years, almost 40 years now, on the Crow Agency Reservation up in Montana. Seeing these people as kin, seeing buffalo as kin, seeing land as kin, because that's what they are, they're living beings too. I think that's what I would want non-native allies to understand, not just respecting Indigenous people, but respecting them as a person because they are. And then also just, again, listening to Indigenous people and bringing us into these spaces if we're not already in them. Because, what I've noticed is that, it's in some spaces, non-native spaces that I go to, I see people throwing around buzzwords like TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, or, decolonize this space, decolonize that space, or even nowadays, even at the YCLC meeting, what kind of shocked me, not in a bad way, but is that I've never seen non-natives use the 7 generations teaching and 7 generations mindset teaching, because that's something that's rooted into, us as Plains people, as, Dakota people, Lakota people, Kiowa people, Cheyenne people, the natives of the Southern Plains, that comes from us, that 7 generations teaching. And that's just something that I wish more people would do. And also, like, in their everyday life, using those kind of mindsets in their everyday life. But also, when you do, want to use those, like in your conferences and your workshops too, I think you should also give credit to Native people, but also be uplifting them and inviting them into these spaces. Instead of just throwing words around. And even land acknowledgements, I think it's good to acknowledge whose land you're on. I'm glad that, people are able to. So I live on Kiowa land, I live on Wichita land, Caddo land. And, knowing and being mindful that you're in somebody's traditional homelands and their territory, but that's only doing so much, just kind of what more can I do? That's what I would think as a non-native ally. I would be like, well, now what? That's kind of my question, my question to, the viewers, like, sure, I'm on somebody's land, sure, like we're using the indigenous knowledge, we're using these words, we're giving credit to them, but now what is the next step that we can take to uplift Native communities?
Yeah, that's so true. And I guess to also just do a land acknowledgement right now, I think I am currently, I would say I am on the land of the Nisenan, Maidu, and Miwok people. That's I hope I said those correctly, but those are the native lands of where I am right now. But now transitioning kind of a little bit into more of the things that you do. You're part of the Native Girls Mental Health Advisory Board. What are some of the most pressing issues Indigenous girls are facing right now?
So I'm on that advisory board, and it's a collaboration between a group called Indigenous Justice Circle and Johns Hopkins University. And that's just a small advisory board of about 4 girls, all around the same age as me, who are doing kind of similar work in Native communities in different places around North America. And in that advisory board, we just talk about, what are some things that we see in our own home communities that are, need to be addressed. And it's honestly like some of the overlying factors, they affect Native girls all throughout North America. So one of the biggest ones that's been very detrimental to Native American women, Native communities everywhere, Indigenous peoples everywhere, is the missing and murdered Indigenous women epidemic. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that crisis, but the statistic is that 1 in 4 Native women will be abused or face domestic violence, sexual violence at some point in her life. And just think about 4 women in your life that you know. One of those women will go through that kind of trauma in her lifetime. And I can't remember the exact statistic off my mind. I used to be able to, but I know we're probably like 10 times more likely. I want to say it's 10 times more likely to be murdered than any other group of people, just because of racial injustice, when it comes to the justice system, and also not having the correct resources, and also us being targeted, as a vulnerable group of women and a vulnerable population. We're seen as easy targets for that kind of violence. And also, the most staggering statistic of all the statistics that I just gave is that 97 or 98% of the perpetrators that commit violence against Native women are not Native. So they're non-Native people that are coming into Native communities and abusing our women, taking advantage of our women, harming our women, even murdering our women. And it's honestly something that doesn't get enough media coverage at all. Like, I'm sure you might not even be familiar with it, but it's something that has affected, Native communities all from, the lower 48, Alaska, Hawaii, Canada. It's something that's in every community, and it affects us, in so many ways. And I used to be a part of our Kiowa tribe missing and murdered Indigenous peoples chapter. And in that, we try to do our best, to advocate on the policy level. We go to the state capitol often, and also just be there as a comforting group, and support our families that have, lost loved ones, and even sometimes boots on the ground work, like looking for girls and, handing out flyers for girls that are missing. And it's honestly, it's a really sad topic to discuss, but it's something that is important to discuss as well, I believe. And obviously there's other issues affecting our young women as well, that, trying to keep our loved ones out of, drugs and alcohol. And there's a lot of, bad things that, our girls go through. And that's kind of what we talk about in our advisory board, and come up with solutions, how we can fight those things. That's kind of what my project is, like steering them on the right path, through culture, through language, and through the land. That's kind of, why I'm on that advisory board, and kind of like brainstorming on how we can, protect them in that way and keep them feeling valued and empowered in that way.
I did not know any of that. I might have to go and learn more about that. Send me all the info and
Yeah,
information on that.
look up MMIW, and you can find
M.Y.
I.
I.U.
Yes, missing and
Okay.
murdered Indigenous women, but also it goes for men as well. Our men are also targeted for violence and like the police and everything, but the most popular hashtag that goes around is MMIW.
Okay. So I would check that out. Also to all our listeners and viewers, y'all, make sure y'all go check that out. Be aware. And, it's phenomenal that you're actually at the forefront of this, which is awesome to have you be the voice of change to your community and for your community. And your organization, Dauitagya, it supports, am I saying that right?
Dauitagya.
Dauitagya it supports mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being through culture and land connection. And I've seen you've done some projects so far and some work so far. How's the progress of that going? And where do you see yourself? Or where do you see the organization and the project do you see at the forefront for being the lead on these things?
Can you repeat the question? I'm
So
sorry.
how does your organization support the mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being through culture and land connection? Is it something that you're pushing to continue doing to be at the forefront and leading on this, or you just want to be a ally collaborator, or what kind of resources I guess would you need to continue being at the forefront for advocating for Native girls
Yeah, I
and
think
women?
it's definitely a project that's at the forefront, because I think, again, land and culture and ceremony, song, all that stuff to me is healing, and the buffalo is healing. And that's just something I could speak to in my own experiences and just growing up in a cultural household and, being around my community, being around ceremony, being at our dances, that's something that makes me feel good inside in my heart. And I think that there's other aspects, different things that we can do to uplift our girls in that way, through culture. I don't know. I think because culture was something that was taken away from us, through government policies. Like they came in and they tried to genocide us, and then they tried to assimilate us. There was the boarding school area where we weren't allowed to practice our culture. We weren't allowed to practice our languages. And, we were taught, or not us, but, the older generations were taught that that was bad. Practicing your culture, practicing your language, speaking a language, that was bad. And that was never the case. But these things were beaten into them, and it was a lot of violent things that went down in the boarding school period. And during that time also we were being put on reservations, and that caused a lot of loss of, our culture and our languages across the board, in every community. Um, and, some communities have lost a lot for good. There's a lot of tribes that do have languages that they no longer have speakers of. The Kiowa tribe, we have a few, probably like a handful of people that can still speak Kiowa and can remember those days. And I think that's why it's so important to include the language as well. But just again, like, I don't know, I think it makes it even more important, because I think when we practice our languages and we practice our cultures again, it heals us, but it also heals that intergenerational trauma, that our ancestors carried, our grandparents carried. It heals a part of that as well because, we're able to practice that again. And I think it also will heal them, those spirits that have gone on just because, they're able to see, their little ones that they prayed for that we're still carrying on, we're still keeping on, we're trying. I'm trying to do all the things. I'm trying to do culture, trying to do language. So I just hope that, it's making my ancestors happy and making my grandparents happy. I think that's honestly why the work, I'm so passionate about it. Cause I think that, by doing this cultural stuff, doing the land-based education, the language, all of it, I think we're helping build, the next generation of ancestors that are going to be able to carry, this stuff on because they will be able to. That's what I always talk about. I think we're building the next generation of matriarchs because we are. We're raising these Kaiba women to be empowered through culture, know who they are culturally, know who they are spiritually, know who they are mentally, and just, letting them know that you are valuable and don't let anybody tell you different and that they're able to be a beautiful, strong Kaiba woman. And I think that's kind of, our goal.
Wow, that's really amazing. And as I was actually preparing for our podcast today, I was trying to read up and understand Native American history, all the tribes. It's a lot of history. Like for anybody out there listening and watching, go out there and read about it. You will learn a lot of different things. And it honestly kind of took me away from some of the things I learned in schools. And I was like, I didn't
Yeah.
learn that. Why did I not learn that? That was very important. Like the most I think the most significant thing I ever learned was there was the trail. Is it something about trail?
Trail of Tears.
The Trail of Tears. That's the only thing I could probably tell you that I do remember from school learning about. And it's not even on a positive note. It was more of a negative note, like the way it was taught to me. But after learning more about it, and as I'm still going to learn more about it, something that's very interesting, and I think more people should be more knowledgeable on it. I should definitely be more knowledgeable on it, and I'm going to keep learning on it. And I really appreciate your organization, what it's doing, and how it's being at the forefront for this because it's essentially kind of what we're also doing here at the Voices of Change. You are a voice of change for your generation and for the youth that you represent. So that's really awesome, and it's just really amazing to be able to be parallel in our spheres of the work that we do and the things that we do, and how it ties back to the land we're from, the language that we've learned, which actually also makes me like I'm challenging myself right now. My mother tongue is Kikuyu, and I ain't gonna lie, like it's hard to talk this sometimes because I don't really say it all the time because I'm around English all the time. But I'm fully able to still speak Swahili, but I can understand Kikuyu. But saying it all the time, I can say sentences, but they'll
Yeah.
be choppy. So it's something that I'm also like really kind of trying to be grounded on because it's really important, especially when being at the forefront for a specific piece of land and area that is indigenous to an area and being and advocating for it, something that I think is really important. So,
Yeah.
I
Could
just
I
want
just
to,
say something to that too?
yeah, yeah,
I think I encourage you to do that too, because I think, that's how I felt as well. Like when I first started like actively learning Kiowa, it was really hard. But even if you learn like one word a day, I think that's really important because like what it was told to me by my late mentor, um, my language mentor, her Kiowa name is Soku Koma, Martha Napula. She passed away just last month, and she was one that really helped me with the language. One word that she shared with me is that why, as Indigenous people, it's so important to learn our languages is because our creator who gave us those gifts, and when we go return to see him, when it's our time to go and pass on, I'm not sure what your beliefs are, he's going to ask us, what did you do with the language that I gave you, and he's going to ask, are you really Kiowa, if you can't speak Kiowa. And that kind of like woke me up, to like not just my language but all the Indigenous people around me, like why are we not learning our language the way we should. And it's sad that, they were taken away from us in different ways. But I think it's honestly so important. So it makes me happy that, you're really trying to ground yourself back into that. And I really encourage you to do so. And that makes me really happy.
yeah. Yeah, challenge accepted. It's something that I used to speak it, but it's just hard because I'm not practicing it all the time. But I'm definitely gonna thank you for the encouragement. Something that I'm gonna keep doing because it's definitely important to. Damn, you just made me question a lot of things right now about the whole. They gonna ask me, "What did you do with the language?" Now I'm like, I'm scared now. So now I'm a little bit more inspired. I feel more ready to actually be more serious about it. And just thank you so much for sharing that and kind of connecting all the dots and how everything you're doing is very central to who you are. Now, kind of transitioning to our next segment before we come to a close here today. On the Voices of Change, well, I don't have my co-host who are here with me today. When he watches this, I want him to know where the hell are you, bro? But we do this segment where it's called Three for the Founders, where we share three things to know, try, and reflect on. So I'll say one, I'll say another one, and then you'll have the hot topic to say today. And since it's just two of us, I'll say two of them, and then you'll do the hot topic. It can be anything in terms of to know, try, or reflect on based upon our conversation today. So with number one, three for the founders today. Number one today, I'm going to say land isn't separate from us. It's a relative and not a resource. It's something we should all be grounded and rooted in and with because the land that you're on is very important and has a lot of meaning to not just you, but everybody else around you. Also to the trees around you. It's gonna sound crazy me saying this, but if you ever have a moment, just go talk to a tree. You might find something in yourself, but not to be crazy or anything. But it's very important to
It's not crazy.
appreciate and accept the land that we are from and we're at. So that's number one. Number two I have is protecting the planet means protecting indigenous sovereignty. They are inseparable. And I think it's very important to always remember that is that everybody has history, land has history, countries have history, situations have history, and it's important to protect that indigenous sovereignty because they're very inseparable. Now, for number three, which is a hot topic of the day. So this week's hot topic comes from our guest, Codie. So go ahead and share your hot topic for the day for the Three for the Founders segment.
Okay, so since you said reflection, when it can be a reflection, I kind of want to have like a kind of like a call to like the viewers, to reflect on themselves and, kind of thinking like, what am I doing to be a good relative? And, and a good relative to, others, but also a good relative to the land. How am I holding myself accountable? And that's just something I would like for everybody to reflect on. What actions am I taking, to take care of the land and my community? What actions am I taking to take care of our culture, to take care of the language, take care of the people and community? Just, are you being a good relative? That's kind of my question for everybody, for the viewers.
Topic of the day, y'all. Are you being a good relative? That's wow. I'm gonna have to ponder on that too. Wow. That's awesome. I didn't expect that. So thank you for sharing that for our hot topic of the day. And for today, I just want to say, thank you so much for sharing your story, your insight with us today. And to come to a close, if you could leave with our listeners one message, what would it be? You already left us with a strong one is, are you being a good relative? A lot of accountability there. But is there any last words or any last things you would like to mention? Where can people also find more information about, what you're doing? Where can people follow your work with your organization?
Well, first, I would like to say thank you again for inviting me to be a part of this podcast. It really means a lot. Really doing your part on, uplifting, people who are doing climate work, people that are Indigenous doing climate work. So I really appreciate you for inviting me on. But I would say I would like to leave people with, just a couple things. I've already kind of like said a few of this stuff, but also, I just want to reiterate it again one more time. To uplift Indigenous people, your local Indigenous groups, wherever you may live, um, just know whose land you're on, but also, know kind of the history of the land that you're on too, like who lived here, what kind of tribe are they, like what happened to them, and just kind of not forgetting that we're still here and that we still exist, because we do. And like kind of just, kind of reading up maybe on Indigenous history, Indigenous peoples, and kind of understanding the struggles that we go through because, we're fighting a constant battle as Indigenous people, across the world. Like Indigenous people across the world, we've all suffered from the same exact, not the same exact, but very similar experiences when it comes to genocide, when it comes to colonization, when it comes to assimilation. We've all faced very similar battles. And then again, just I would like everybody to just reflect, on what you're doing to be a good person in your community. Are you being a good relative? What am I doing to take care of the land that I'm on, that I reside on? And just, I want to tell everybody, be kind to one another, drink your water, be a good person, be a good relative, be mindful, pray. And then, yeah, that's kind of my closing remarks. And if you want to learn more about our program, it's Dauitagya in our Kiowa language. And I know it might be difficult to spell, but it's Dauitagya on Instagram, on TikTok, and we also are on Facebook. The majority of our following is on Facebook, and our name on there is Dauitagya Good Medicine. So yeah, if you want to stay in the loop, and we try to post our Kiowa language quite often on there. Our upcoming events will definitely be posted, and we try to post like cultural, like fun facts and everything often, just to keep the page rolling. So if you want to. Also reach out to me on those pages you can. I'm always open for any collaborations or if you have any questions.
Wonderful. And just hearing that, it made me think about a quote by Frederick Douglass. if there's no struggle, there's no progress. And I think, where there is history, there is progress. So I really just want to say I appreciate what you're doing for your community, because you're continuing the historical relevance and significance and building upon it, and continuing being a voice of change, not just for yourself, but for everybody else around you. And to all our listeners, remember, environmental stewardship begins with connection, not just to land, but to people, culture, and to story. And as you can see, there is a great example out there going on. It's Dauitagya. I can't say. Did I say that right?
Dauitagya.
Sorry. Dauitagya. Dauitagya. You can find all the information in the description below where you can follow. They'll also be tagged in all of our Instagram, social media, reels, and everything. So be on the lookout for that, y'all. And if you really appreciated this episode, subscribe and check out more on the Alive Podcast Network. Supporting this show and everything that we do means uplifting independent Black and Indigenous media as well. So just want to say thank you so much, Codie, for being on here. And it's really been a pleasure talking to you. And can't wait to see what progress continues going on.
Thank you for having me, and it was good to chat with you.
Thank you. We'll see y'all next time on the Voices of Change. Peace out, y'all.